Hi guys, and welcome back to Elizabeth Ann Reads. Today we're going to do my January wrap-up. So last year I just kind of stopped doing wrap-ups. I wasn't really caring about what I was reading, didn't have strong thoughts about it for the most part. I didn't have a whole lot of new favorites from last year. So I just, like I said, I just kind of stopped. But I intend to do them this year, hopefully, at least most of the time. So let's talk about the 7 books that I read in January. 7 is, for recently, it's a good number for me. I haven't been reading a ton recently. My numbers were fairly low last year, and that's fine. Just other things going on. But I'm pretty happy with 7 books, and they were almost all off my TBR. I have a couple off of my 22 books to read in 2022 that I already got done, so I'm pretty excited about that. I feel like I'm off to a good start. The first book I read this year was For Whom the Sun Sings by W.A. Fulkerson. This is a middle grade dystopian. I would almost say it definitely has some cult vibes. It's not technically a cult book, but if you like cult books, this might also be up your alley. It has some similar vibes. Initially, when I finished this book, and I'm going to give you a synopsis in just a minute, but initially when I finished this book, I gave it a 3, like a fairly high 3. But the more I've thought about it, I've definitely bumped it up to a 4. I have not been able to stop thinking about it, I guess, is my main thing. It keeps coming back to me, and I keep kind of processing the different things in the book. So, in this book, we follow 11-year-old Andreas, who lives in what is essentially the last village on Earth. Andreas can see, but everyone else in the village is blind. So in my mind, this book is a little bit of a mix of the book The Giver and the movie The Village, which might clue you in a little bit to the plot here. But we follow Andreas in his kind of journey of discovery as he kind of grows up and discovers that he's kind of different than everyone else. My challenge with this book, my struggle, was that it lacked drive. Like, I kind of figured out what the main point or the main reveal was going to be within the first 2 chapters of the book. So I didn't have a whole lot of drive to continue on with this book because I felt like I knew what was going to happen. And I was right. I did pretty much know how the plot was going to play out. However, the way the author handles having only one sighted person in a world of blind people was very interesting. And the words he uses and the terminology he uses, because they, as a people that is entirely blind, they have no words to describe things like color. They don't even have the word color. They don't have colors because no one can see. They don't, there's just this whole terminology that no longer exists. So Andreas, as he's discovering that other people can't use their eyes like he can, has to come up with this whole new terminology, and he uses the word notes to describe colors, like how you can, you can sing a word, but it can sound multiple ways because you can put it on different notes, right? It can be 2 different notes or multiple different notes. So he starts trying to describe it as this way. This bug, this grasshopper that he sees, has 2 different notes, meaning there's 2 different colors of grasshoppers. And he's trying to describe this, and no one else can, of course, understand what he's talking about. It was handled really, really well and very thoughtfully. And I really appreciated the way the author just very kind of slowly explored this idea. And it also, towards the end, it deals with some ideas of truth and how we handle truth that we don't understand, and how people tend to change it to fit what they want it to be, versus what truth actually is. And I think there were some really, really interesting ideas in here that Fulkerson explored. If you're into dystopian, or if you're fascinated by cult books, again, this is not technically a cult book, but it had those vibes. I would definitely recommend checking this out. It's kind of slow. Like I said, there's no huge twist, or at least I wasn't surprised by the huge twist. But I can't stop thinking about it. Just the ideas in there I thought were super, super interesting. So I would, if that sounds interesting, I would recommend checking that one out for sure. The next book or novella, I think it's technically, they call it a novella, but it's technically it's like 300 pages. And that was Evershore by Brandon Sanderson and Jancy Patterson. This is, if you don't know, the Skyward series by Brandon Sanderson. They recently, in the last few months, came out with 3 novellas. And in these novellas, we follow other characters in that world. Not Spencer, but other characters that have come into the stories. So Evershore is the third and final, I believe, of these 3 novellas. And so I read that. I had already read the others. And it was good. I have to say, I love the first Skyward book. But in my mind, the series has gone downhill a little bit since then. Nothing else has quite measured up to that first one. And that's how I feel about the novellas. They're fine. They're interesting. I enjoy them. But they're not going to stick with me. And so if you're really into the Skyward series, if you enjoy that world, then sure, pick it up, read it. It's very enjoyable. Then I read a nonfiction, and that was The Day the World Came to Town, 9/11 in Gander, Newfoundland, by Jem DeFeedy. This talks about 9/11 and this little island in Canada where multiple planes, 30 or 40 some planes, I believe, were forced to land and spend several days in this small town of Gander. Because on 9/11, when all the planes were grounded, they did not let any international flights land in the U.S. Everything was either turned around and sent back to its place of origin or was diverted to Canada. So domestic flights could land in the U.S., but no international flights could. So a whole bunch of flights ended up diverted to Gander, Newfoundland. And it's a very small community, but it just talks about how the people in the community just kind of came around and loved on and took care of these people that ended up stranded there for several days till planes could fly again. And just, it follows a whole bunch of stories. I think that's my one complaint, is it almost follows too many stories. Like, it was almost too scattered that I had a hard time keeping track of who was who, and had a little trouble just following it in general. I definitely recommend reading it. Just how this community just really loved on these people that were lost and scared and had no clue really of when or how they were going to get where they were going. They felt separated from their families, from their kids in some cases. And yeah, it was just a very heartwarming, really, really interesting story, and would recommend that for sure. Next up, I read When the World Was Ours by Liz Kessler. This is another middle grade. This is historical fiction, World War II fiction. We follow 3 friends, Leo, Max, and Elsa. And what I loved about this is we follow them from 1936, so before the war, to 1945, after the war. So we basically see all of their teen years. They start as like 9 or 10-year-olds, I think, and then up to their young adulthood. So these 3 are friends from a young age. They meet at school. They're friends. 2 of them are Jewish. 1 is not. And it follows their journeys through the war and what happens to each one of them, how that impacts their lives and their friendships. And so, yeah, we kind of end up splitting into 3 different storylines. And it is really, really well done. This is my highest rated of the year yet so far. I gave it 5 stars. I would say maybe 4.5. I don't think it's quite perfect, but it was really, really good and would definitely recommend. But also because it spans such a big age range, it almost ends up feeling more YA at the end of the book than at the beginning. So it's definitely middle grade, but at the very end, it definitely feels a little more YA. It has some very heavy themes. I would not give it to a sensitive middle grade reader. It definitely doesn't sugarcoat the horrors of World War II and what happened to some of the people. It definitely has some very intense, kind of heavy moments. So just be cautious if you have a young reader that's more sensitive to those things. I loved their friendship. I loved how they each struggled through the war in different ways. They each had different challenges. Each storyline kind of delved into a different element of the war, and I really enjoyed that. So yeah, I would recommend. It's difficult. It has very difficult moments. So just be warned. It's not, your light, happy middle grade read, but really, really good, really well done. Then I picked up another historical fiction. This is Where the Lost Wander by Amy Harmon. This was my first Amy Harmon, and this is a historical fiction revolving around the Oregon Trail. I've heard so many great things about this book. Sadly, I did not love it. It's not, I gave it like a 3 stars. It was fun. In it, we have a dual perspective. We follow Naomi, who is a young widow traveling west with her family, her parents, and then her younger siblings. And they're traveling west on a wagon train. And then we have John, who is a mixed race. His father was white, but his mother was Native American. And he deals with the animals. He works with animals, and so he ends up on this train as well. It's a really, really slow moving book, which is fine. I'm sure being on the Oregon Trail felt really slow too. But it felt like it took forever to get any sort of plot going. And really the only part that was super interesting was the last like 60 to 80 pages. And then the plot moved quite fast, but it just felt like it took way too long to get there. And I just didn't care that much. Like, I wasn't that invested in the characters. Yeah, it felt really slow, and I didn't find it all that good. There is, again, some pretty intense stuff in here, some violence, as well as some sexual assault, so be aware of those things. But yeah, it was just kind of meh for me. I do have another Amy Harmon, so I am going to give her another try. But this one was just kind of middle of the road for me. It was fine, but not something I would necessarily recommend. Then I finally read Still Life by Louise Penny. This is the first in the Inspector Armand Gamache series. I've intended to start the series for at least 2 years, and I finally did. This was the book I read for Chantel Reads All Day, her Read Your Bookshelf Challenge, which was to read a book with a quiet word in the title, and I thought Still qualified for that. Oh, Where the Lost Wander is what I read for the Buzzwordathon Challenge, which was the who, what, when, where, why in the title. But anyway, Still Life by Louise Penny. So this is set in a small town in Canada, and you have a mystery and an inspector. And I really enjoyed it. It hit a 4-star for me. I enjoyed the storyline, but mostly I enjoyed the community and the characters, and I'm really excited to get to know this community more. I think there's a lot of fascinating characters that I want to know more. I was a little lost sometimes because, again, they're introducing so many characters and I don't know them yet. But I'm excited to continue on with the series and get to know them more. So I'm definitely going to pick up more in the series and see where it goes in the next few books. And then the very last book I have to talk about for this month is The Shadow of What Was Lost by James Eilington. This, full disclosure, I technically finished this one in February, but I read the vast majority of it in January, so I'm going to count it for January. This is a high fantasy. In it, we follow... It's so hard. I have the hardest time, giving a quick synopsis of epic fantasy. But basically, this is a world that has, 20 years in the past, went through a war. Those with magical powers are called gifted, and they are not looked on favorably by society. So we follow 3 main characters who are at a school for the gifted. It starts when they're about 16, so like a high school, basically. And it's for the gifted. It's where these people with these abilities are sent to kind of be shut away and learn how to, handle their powers. So we start in the school setting, but it very, very quickly leaves the school setting. And these 3 characters, their paths diverge, and you end up kind of on 3 different tracks again, following these 3 different characters and what's going on in this world. And that's about all I'm going to say. This is the first in a trilogy, and I did really enjoy it. It looks super massively huge. It's not as bad. It's less than 700 pages. The pages are pretty thick, so it's actually not quite as intimidating as it looks. And it reads very easily. It's not super dense like some fantasy can be. So it reads pretty quickly. I enjoyed it. I would give it probably a 3.5, maybe a 4. But I definitely enjoyed it enough to continue on with the series and see where these characters go. So I'm going to hopefully be doing that soon-ish, before too long. I will continue on and read book 2 in the series. But yes, So that is it. So there was some good stuff in there. I read some good stuff this month. I read some stuff I didn't love quite as much, but I did read some really good things this month. So that is it. I would love to know down in the comments below what the favorite book you read in January was. And thank you for watching.